My family had a nickname for me, the background noise. While my sisters were the melody and my brother was the rhythm, I was just there, the one you forget to invite to the photo. But at my parents' 50th anniversary gala, a man whose face is known by every billionaire in Europe walked into the ballroom. He didn't head for the head table. He walked straight to the kids' corner, knelt beside my chair and said, "Master, the world has been waiting for you." The silence that followed? It didn't just break the music. It broke 30 years of lies. Before I tell you what happened that night, take 1 second to subscribe if you love emotional stories about hidden strength, family betrayal, and unexpected revenge. Like this video if you've ever felt overlooked by the people who were supposed to see you the most. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your country right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. I used to think every family had roles assigned to them before they were even old enough to speak. In my house, Clara was beauty, Julian was success, and I was the inconvenience, the extra chair at the table, the child people spoke over, the one who quietly disappeared from conversations without anyone noticing. My mother loved perfection more than people. She believed appearances were everything. Matching outfits for Christmas photos, perfect lawns, crystal glasses nobody was allowed to touch. Even our laughter had rules in that house. Clara fit perfectly into my mother's world. She had golden hair that curled naturally and a smile that made strangers stop and stare. My mother treated her like royalty from the day she was born. Julian came next. Smart, sharp, competitive. By 16 he already spoke like a man running for office. Teachers loved him. Adults praised him. My mother introduced him like he was some kind of trophy she personally built. Then there was me. Alara, the girl sitting on the kitchen floor taking apart old radios just to see how they worked. The girl who preferred gears over gossip. The girl who smelled like machine oil instead of perfume. My mother hated that about me. Not loudly at first. At first it came in small comments. You would look prettier if your hands were cleaner. No man wants a woman obsessed with tools. Why can't you be more like your sister? Funny thing is, after enough years those little comments stop sounding little. They become the voice inside your own head. I remember the exact moment I realized I was different in their eyes. I was 8 years old. My grandfather had just died. Everyone else cried at the funeral, but I couldn't stop staring at the old pocket watch they buried him with for the ceremony before taking it back. It was silver with tiny stars engraved around the edges. Broken. Silent. Forgotten in a velvet box near the flowers. While everyone mourned, I kept thinking about the stopped hands frozen at 11:42. I don't know why that bothered me so much. Maybe because even then, I understood what it felt like to stop being seen. After the funeral, I sneaked into my grandfather's workshop in the basement. Dust covered everything. Old clocks lined the walls like sleeping giants. Some ticked softly. Others had been silent for years. I sat there alone for hours. That was the first time I learned something important. Broken things still have stories. You just have to listen long enough. My grandfather used to repair watches before arthritis ruined his hands. Nobody in the family cared about it except me. To everyone else, his workshop was just a dark basement full of junk. To me, it felt alive. I started spending every free moment there. At 10 years old, I repaired my first clock. At 11, I fixed the toaster my mother was about to throw away. At 12, I restored my grandfather's pocket watch completely on my own. Nobody celebrated any of it. Not really. My mother barely looked up from her magazine when I showed her the watch ticking again. "That's nice, dear," she said. "Now go wash up before guests arrive." That sentence became the soundtrack of my childhood. "That's nice, dear." Always followed by dismissal. Always followed by someone else mattering more. One summer afternoon, my mother hosted a massive garden party for local business families. White roses everywhere. String music playing softly across the lawn. Expensive dresses. Fake smiles. I hated those parties. Everyone there talked like they were performing. At one point, I overheard my mother introducing us to another couple. "This is Clara," she said proudly. "Future star." Then she smiled toward Julian. "And this is our brilliant son. He'll probably run his own law firm one day." Then her eyes landed on me standing near the lemonade table with grease stains still under my nails from working on a clock upstairs. She laughed softly. "And this one?" she said. "Well, every family needs a shadow to make the lights look brighter." Everyone laughed, including Clara, including Julian. I laughed too. That's what hurt the most. I laughed because I wanted them to love me. That night, I locked myself in my grandfather's workshop and cried harder than I ever had before. Then I did something strange. I took apart an old watch completely blindfolded. Tiny gears, microscopic screws, delicate springs. I forced myself to feel every piece with my fingertips until I understood where everything belonged without seeing it. Hour after hour, night after night, because somehow it felt easier to understand machines than people. Machines never lied. A broken gear didn't pretend to love you while making you feel invisible. Timepieces became my escape from reality. Every watch carried secrets. Every clock had scars. Some had survived wars, fires, shipwrecks, generations of careless owners. Yet somehow, they still ticked. I think a part of me wanted to believe people could survive like that too. By 16, I was repairing watches for local collectors secretly. Wealthy men would arrive at the back door carrying velvet cases like they were transporting treasure. Most of them looked shocked when they realized the young specialist was a teenage girl. Then they saw my work. And suddenly their expressions changed. One collector cried after I restored his father's war watch. Another paid me more money than I had ever seen just to repair a cracked moon phase complication. I hid every dollar inside old toolboxes beneath the floorboards. Not because I was greedy, because deep down I knew one thing for certain. One day I would leave that house. And when I did, nobody was coming to save me. My father noticed more than he admitted. He wasn't cruel like my mother. Just quiet. Painfully quiet. Like a man who had spent his whole life swallowing words before they could become arguments. Sometimes late at night, he'd stand in the basement doorway watching me work beneath the yellow lamp glow. Neither of us spoke much. But one evening when I was 17, he placed an old leather notebook beside me. Inside were pages filled with my grandfather's restoration sketches, rare mechanisms, handwritten notes, tiny observations about time and craftsmanship. At the very front he had written one sentence. "For the child who actually listened." I stared at those words for a long time, because for the first time in my life I felt seen. Not by my mother, not by my siblings, but by someone who understood silence. And maybe that's why what happened at the anniversary gala years later hurt them so badly. Because the world finally saw what my family spent decades trying to ignore. And once the truth enters a room like that, nothing stays hidden for long. I left home 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. No dramatic fight. No screaming match. No heartfelt goodbye at the front door. My mother barely looked away from the television when I carried my suitcase downstairs. Clara was busy planning some beach trip with friends. Julian was already talking about internships and law school interviews like he had the entire world mapped out in front of him. Nobody asked me to stay. That part stayed with me longer than I expected. You always imagine that maybe at the last second someone will stop you. Someone will suddenly realize your absence might matter. But silence can answer questions words never do. My father drove me to the bus station before sunrise. Rain tapped softly against the windshield the entire ride. The kind of quiet rain that makes everything feel unfinished. He kept both hands on the steering wheel almost the whole time. His wedding ring tapped nervously against the leather every few seconds. I remember staring out the window wondering if leaving would finally make me free. Or just lonely somewhere else. When we pulled into the station parking lot, neither of us moved for a moment. Then my father reached into his coat pocket and handed me a thick envelope. It felt heavy. Inside was cash. More money than I thought he even had access to without my mother noticing. But underneath the bills was something else. A small silver gear wrapped carefully in cloth. My grandfather's signature gear. The one he used to say belonged only in watches worth saving. I looked up at my father. His eyes were already wet. "Keep time," he whispered. "Don't let them steal yours." That was it. No speech. No grand emotional moment. Just one sentence from a man who spent his whole life speaking too late. I hugged him harder than I ever had before. Then I got on the bus. And for the first time in my life, nobody knew where I was going. The city I moved to was cold and loud and completely indifferent to me. Honestly, I think I needed that. Nobody cared who my family was there. Nobody compared me to Clara. Nobody asked why I wasn't more ambitious like Julian. I rented a tiny apartment above an old bakery where the walls shook every morning at 5 when the oven started. The radiator barely worked. The ceiling leaked during storms. But it was mine. I turned the kitchen table into a watch bench using second-hand tools and an old desk lamp I found beside a dumpster. During the day, I worked at a small repair shop owned by a grumpy old horologist named Matteo. He terrified everyone except me. Customers thought he hated people. Truthfully, he just hated laziness. The first time he tested me, he handed me a shattered vintage chronograph and said, "Fix it." No instructions. No guidance. Just pressure. I worked on that watch for 13 straight hours. My fingers cramped. My eyes burned. Twice I thought I ruined the entire mechanism permanently. But when the second hand finally moved again, Matteo smiled. It was the smallest smile I'd ever seen. "You hear them," he said quietly. I frowned. "Hear who?" "The watches," he answered. "Most people only see money. You hear the story." That night he promoted me from cleaning parts to full restoration work. And from there, everything changed. Years passed strangely after that. Slow during the nights. Fast during the days. I became obsessed with restoration. Not repair. Restoration. There's a difference. Repair fixes function. Restoration brings history back to life. Anyone can replace a battery. Very few people can touch a 100-year-old mechanism without destroying the soul inside it. I learned patience, precision, restraint. The tiniest mistake inside a luxury timepiece can erase millions of dollars and centuries of craftsmanship. One damaged spring, one slip of the hand, one impatient decision, gone forever. In a strange way, watches taught me how fragile people are too. By 24, collectors started requesting me by name. By 26, private clients flew across countries carrying family heirlooms locked inside armored briefcases. Some watches had survived royal families. Others crossed oceans hidden during wars. One client brought me a burned pocket watch recovered from a sinking ship. Another trusted me with a piece once owned by a famous European queen whose name I still legally cannot say. I signed contracts worth more money than my entire family house. Yet every Thanksgiving when I returned home, my mother still asked the same question. "So are you still fixing batteries?" Every single year. Like my entire life could fit inside that sentence. The first time she asked, I tried to explain. Big mistake. I told her about restorations, museums, auction houses. She smiled politely the way people do when humoring children. "Oh," she interrupted. "That's sweet. Anyway, Julian just closed a major case downtown. After that, I stopped trying. It became easier to let them underestimate me. There's a strange freedom in invisibility. People reveal themselves when they think you don't matter. Clara spent most family dinners talking about luxury vacations in social circles. Julian treated conversations like courtroom competitions he always needed to win. And my mother treated attention like oxygen. She collected successful people around her like decorations. Doctors, politicians, investors. Anyone impressive enough to strengthen the image she built around herself. Meanwhile, I quietly built a reputation on another continent. A hidden one. The luxury world is strange. The richest people on earth trust silence more than fame. Most of my clients never posted photos, never gave interviews, never revealed names. Discretion became part of my value. I restored watches for people powerful enough to buy islands without checking prices. Yet some nights I still sat alone in my apartment eating noodles from paper cartons, wondering why none of it healed the part of me that still felt invisible. Success is strange like that. Changes your life. But it doesn't always change your wounds. Then came the midnight star. The watch that changed everything. I still remember the first moment I saw it. A private courier delivered it during winter wrapped inside 3 layers of security cases. The client requested absolute secrecy. No photographs. No assistance. No public record. Inside rested the most damaged masterpiece I had ever touched. An astronomical complication watch created nearly 200 years earlier by a legendary craftsman, whose work collectors considered almost mythical. Most experts believed the piece was beyond saving. Fire damage blackened the outer case. The internal movement looked destroyed. Half the gears were fused together. The moon phase dial was cracked directly through the center. Even Matteo stared at it for a long time before speaking. "You refuse this job," he said quietly, "or this watch becomes your entire life." I should have walked away. Instead, I whispered one sentence. "When do I start?" For the next 11 months, the midnight star consumed me completely. I barely slept, barely ate. Some nights I worked until sunrise with magnification lenses cutting marks into my skin. I rebuilt microscopic gears by hand, recreated missing components from historical sketches, studied centuries-old engineering techniques forgotten by most modern craftsmen. There were moments I genuinely thought I would fail. Moments I stared at the frozen mechanism and saw myself in it. Damaged. Overlooked. One mistake away from being discarded forever. But something inside me refused to quit. Maybe because restoring that watch felt like proving something to myself. Not to my family. Not to the collectors. To the younger version of me sitting alone in my grandfather's basement trying desperately to become visible. Then one night around 2 a.m., it happened. Tick. One single sound. Tiny. Fragile. Beautiful. The midnight star came back to life. And in that exact moment, mine did too. The first time the midnight star fully awakened, I cried so hard I had to put my tools down. Not graceful tears. Not movie tears. The kind that shake your chest and leave you gasping because something buried inside you finally broke open. For 11 months, that watch had consumed every piece of me. My eyesight worsened. My hands developed tiny scars from precision tools slipping at 3 in the morning. I stopped answering messages. Stopped attending holidays. Stopped existing outside that workshop. And now suddenly, after centuries of silence, the midnight star was ticking beneath my fingertips like a living heartbeat. Matteo stood beside me quietly for a long moment. Then he did something he had never done before. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You restored more than a watch," he said. I didn't fully understand what he meant back then. I would later. The owner of the midnight star arrived 2 days later under heavy security. Not because he was famous, because men like him don't need fame. True power usually moves quietly. He was older, elegant, calm in a way only extremely wealthy people seem to be. The kind of calm that comes from never hearing the word no. When I placed the restored watch in front of him, he stared at it without speaking. Then very carefully he picked it up. The room became completely silent except for the soft ticking. Tick, tick, tick. His hands trembled. That shocked me more than anything. People like him aren't supposed to tremble. After nearly a minute, he looked at me with wet eyes. "My father carried this during the war," he whispered. "I thought his time died with him." I didn't know what to say, so I simply answered honestly, "Nothing truly loved ever disappears completely." He closed the watch slowly. Then he asked me a question that changed my entire life. "Do you know what you've restored?" I thought he meant the historical value, the craftsmanship, the rarity. But he shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You restored legacy." 3 months later, the midnight star appeared on the cover of the most prestigious horology catalog in the world. No public interview. No dramatic spotlight. Just one photo. Me sitting quietly at my workbench beneath warm golden light holding the restored masterpiece. Underneath it were 4 words. The Master of Lost Time. I almost laughed when I first saw it. If my mother could see this now, I thought. Then strangely, I closed the magazine and went back to work. Because even after everything, part of me still struggled to believe I deserved recognition. Success had become normal. Visibility had not. The requests exploded after that. Collectors from Switzerland, royal advisors from Europe, private museums, auction houses. For the first time in my life, people waited months just to speak with me. But no matter how much my world changed, my family stayed exactly the same. That's the strange thing about people who refuse to see you. Even reality doesn't always convince them. I still attended holidays occasionally. Mostly for my father. He looked older every year. Quieter too. Like life had slowly worn his spirit thin. Meanwhile, my mother's obsession with appearances only grew stronger. Every conversation became performance. Every dinner felt staged. And every time someone asked about me, she answered before I could speak. "Oh, Elara works with watches," she'd say casually. "Very niche little hobby." Hobby. I restored pieces worth more than luxury homes. Yet in her mind, I was still the girl in the stained apron. One Christmas, Julian actually laughed when he saw an article mentioning me in a luxury magazine. "Wait," he said. "People actually care about antique watches this much?" Clara smiled over her wine glass. "I think it's cute," she added. "Like arts and crafts for rich people." Everyone laughed. Even guests joined in. And there I sat smiling politely while one of the investors at the same dinner quietly recognized my name and nearly choked on his drink. I'll never forget the expression on his face. He kept staring at me like he'd accidentally discovered royalty hiding at a gas station. But he said nothing. The truly wealthy often understand silence better than anyone. After dinner, he approached me privately near the staircase. "Are you the Elara Vale?" he whispered carefully. I nodded once. The man blinked in disbelief. "My God," he murmured. "Do they know who you are?" I looked toward the dining room where my mother laughed loudly at something Julian said. Then I answered honestly, "No." He looked genuinely disturbed by that. At the time, I didn't realize how shocking my family's blindness seemed to outsiders. Because for me, it was normal. Neglect becomes dangerous when it starts feeling familiar. A few months later, my mother announced the biggest event of her entire life. Their 50th wedding anniversary gala. And not just any party. A spectacle. 500 guests. Historic ballroom. Live orchestra. Politicians. Executives. Socialites. She talked about it for nearly a year like she was preparing for a royal coronation. Clara immediately became obsessed with fashion fittings and guest lists. Julian handled legal arrangements and sponsorships like it was some corporate merger. And me? I almost wasn't invited. I found out accidentally during a phone call with my father. There was this long awkward silence before he quietly admitted my mother assumed I'd probably be too busy with repair work to attend. I remember staring at the wall after the call ended. Not angry, just tired. Tired in a way that settles deep into your bones after years of pretending things don't hurt. 3 days later, an invitation finally arrived. My name was misspelled. I wish I were joking. Even after all those years. Even after international recognition. They still couldn't get my name right. Matteo found me sitting alone in the workshop holding the invitation. He read my face instantly. "You don't have to go," he said. "I know." "Then why are you considering it?" I thought about that for a long time before answering. Because honestly, I didn't fully know. Maybe part of me still wanted what every ignored child secretly wants. To walk into a room and finally be seen. Not tolerated. Not dismissed. Seen. A week before the gala, something unexpected happened. A black car arrived outside my studio. Not unusual by itself. But the man who stepped out made my assistant nearly faint. Monsieur Laurent, CEO of the most prestigious auction house in Europe. A man whose clients included royalty, billionaires, and some of the most powerful collectors alive. Even I was shocked. Men like Laurent don't make personal visits. People go to him, not the other way around. He entered my workshop slowly, studying every detail around him with sharp silver eyes. Then he smiled. "The rumors are true," he said softly. "You really do work alone." I offered him coffee. He declined politely. Then he placed a velvet case on the table. Inside rested another extraordinary watch awaiting restoration. But before discussing business, he asked me something unexpected. "Will you attend your family's anniversary gala next Saturday?" I froze. Slowly, carefully, I looked up at him. "How do you know about that?" A faint smile crossed his face. "My dear Ilara," he said, "in our world, people pay attention to legends." Legends. That word felt unreal attached to me. He noticed my discomfort immediately. Then his expression softened slightly. "You restored the midnight star," he continued quietly. "Do you understand what that means to people like us?" I shook my head. Laurent leaned closer. "It means history remembers your hands." The room fell silent after that. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a glossy black envelope sealed with gold wax. An invitation. Not to an event. To destiny. And I had absolutely no idea that 1 week later, my entire family's illusion was about to collapse in front of 500 witnesses. The night of the gala felt strange from the moment I arrived. Not glamorous. Not exciting. Heavy. Like walking back into a dream you spent years trying to escape. The ballroom glowed with gold light and crystal chandeliers so massive they looked like frozen waterfalls hanging from the ceiling. A string orchestra played softly near the stage while servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the way my mother liked it. Perfect on the surface. I stood near the entrance for a moment watching guests laugh too loudly at conversations nobody would remember tomorrow. Politicians shaking hands. Businessmen comparing watches more expensive than cars. Women in designer gowns smiling with carefully practiced elegance. And right in the center of it all was my mother. Radiant. Commanding. Performing. She spotted me almost immediately. For one tiny second I thought maybe she looked happy I came. Then her eyes dropped to my dress. Simple black silk. Minimal jewelry. No diamonds. No dramatic statement pieces. Her smile tightened instantly. "Oh," she said. "You wore that." Not hello. Not you look beautiful. Just disappointment disguised as politeness. I almost laughed. Some things never change. Clara floated over seconds later wearing a gown so elaborate she could barely walk properly. "You should have told me you were coming alone," she whispered. "I could have arranged seating somewhere less awkward." Less awkward. Meaning less visible. Julien barely glanced up from his conversation with 2 investors before nodding toward me casually. "Hey, Ilara." Then back to discussing mergers. I suddenly felt 17 again. Invisible in a crowded room. A server approached holding seating cards. Table 42. Of course. The table hidden behind a massive marble pillar near the kitchen entrance where staff constantly rushed past carrying trays. I stared at the card for a moment longer than necessary. Then quietly walked across the ballroom. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they did and simply didn't care. Table 42 was filled with distant relatives, forgotten guests, and children playing games beneath the tablecloth. One little girl looked at me curiously while I sat down. "You look sad," she announced immediately. Her mother looked horrified. But I smiled softly. "Only a little." The girl studied me carefully. "My grandma says sad people are usually the nicest." I think that was the kindest thing anyone said to me all night. Across the ballroom, giant projection screens displayed a slideshow titled 50 Years of Love and Legacy. Photo after photo appeared. My mother and father smiling beside luxury cars. Julien holding trophies. Clara at fashion events. Family vacations. Holiday portraits. Graduations. Celebrations. Hundreds of memories carefully selected to tell one specific story. The perfect family. Then suddenly I noticed something strange. I was barely in any of them. Not metaphorically. Literally. In one picture, half my face was cropped out completely. In another, I appeared blurry in the background carrying boxes while everyone else smiled toward the camera. One image from Christmas had actually cut me out so aggressively that only part of my shoulder remained visible. I stared at the screen feeling something cold settle inside me. Because pictures don't lie. People do. You could trace my entire existence inside that family through absence. I wondered how many years it took before someone becomes comfortable erasing you. My father finally noticed me from across the room during dinner service. The relief in his eyes hurt more than neglect ever did. He quietly escaped the head table during speeches and sat beside me for a few minutes. "You came," he whispered. "You asked me to." He nodded slowly. Then his eyes drifted toward the slideshow still playing across the ballroom. His face changed instantly, like he was seeing something for the first time too. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I looked at him carefully. For what? But he couldn't answer. Because some guilt grows too large for language. Before he returned to the head table, he squeezed my hand once. Then he slipped something small into my palm. A watch. Not expensive. Not flashy. Simple silver casing worn smooth around the edges. My breath caught immediately. It was the watch I made for him years ago during my first successful restoration. I gave it to him secretly on his birthday when I was 23. He had worn it every single day since. The leather strap was faded now from years against his skin, but it still ticked perfectly. He noticed me staring at it. "I never stopped wearing your time," he whispered. Then he walked away before I could respond, and for the first time that night, I almost cried. The speeches began shortly afterward. Julian spoke first. Confident, polished, predictable. He described my parents as visionaries who built a legacy of excellence and family unity. I nearly choked on my champagne hearing that phrase. Family unity. Funny how easily people rewrite history when enough guests are watching. Clara followed with the dramatic emotional speech about beauty, love, and tradition while guests dabbed fake tears from their eyes. Then my mother stood. The room instantly quieted. She loved attention the way flowers love sunlight. Her voice carried smoothly across the ballroom. "Tonight is about family," she announced proudly. "About celebrating what truly matters." I looked around slowly. At the crystal chandeliers, the luxury decorations, the expensive guests, and I realized something devastating. My mother genuinely believed this performance was love. That appearances counted more than truth. Halfway through her speech, the ballroom doors suddenly opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to interrupt the rhythm of the evening. At first most guests ignored it. Then whispers started spreading rapidly through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Even the orchestra slowly faded into silence. A tall man entered wearing a dark tailored coat with silver cufflinks that flashed beneath the chandelier light. Older. Elegant. Controlled. The kind of presence that changes the atmosphere of a room instantly without raising its voice. I recognized him immediately. Monsieur Laurent. And judging by the reaction spreading across the ballroom, many others did too. Powerful people suddenly straightened in their seats. Several guests looked genuinely stunned. My mother blinked rapidly before rushing toward him with almost embarrassing excitement. "Monsieur Laurent," she gasped. "What an incredible honor." She extended both hands dramatically. "I had no idea you were attending." Laurent accepted her greeting politely but without warmth. His silver eyes moved across the ballroom carefully like a man searching for something valuable. Or someone. My mother immediately assumed he was there for Julian. Of course she did. "Our son handles corporate law," she said proudly. "Perhaps you've heard of his recent cases." Laurent barely reacted. Instead he asked one calm question. "Where is the creator of the Midnight Star?" The entire ballroom went silent. Not quiet. Silent. Like the air itself stopped moving. My mother laughed nervously. A sharp, uncomfortable sound. "Oh," she said quickly. "There must be some misunderstanding. We don't have creators here. Just lawyers and social figures. Then she smiled dismissively toward my corner of the ballroom. And my daughter Ilara, of course. She repairs watches. Repairs watches. After everything. That was still all she saw. Laurent finally followed her gaze across the room. And the second his eyes found me, everything changed. He didn't hesitate. Didn't speak. Didn't acknowledge anyone else. He simply began walking. Past the head table. Past the investors. Past the politicians. Past every important person in the room. Straight toward table 42. Straight toward me. And suddenly every person who had ignored me all night was staring like they were seeing a ghost materialize in front of them. You could hear every single footstep Monsieur Laurent took across that ballroom. That's how silent the room had become. 500 guests watching. 500 people trying to understand why one of the most powerful men in the luxury world was walking past celebrities and executives. Toward the forgotten table beside the kitchen. Toward me. I stayed seated at first because honestly, my body forgot how to move. My mother looked completely frozen near the stage. Julien's confident expression cracked for the first time all evening. And Clara kept glancing around nervously like this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. But it wasn't. Laurent stopped directly in front of my chair. Then slowly, he bowed. Not a polite nod. Not some casual greeting. A deep respectful bow that made half the room gasp aloud. Mademoiselle Ilara Vale, he said clearly. Forgive my interruption. My hands tightened instinctively around the silver watch my father had given back to me. Laurent straightened carefully before continuing. I have crossed the Atlantic because the owner of the Midnight Star refused to believe any hands except yours could have restored such perfection. Whispers exploded instantly across the ballroom. The Midnight Star. Even people outside horology recognized that name. It had become legendary after the catalog release. I saw guests turning toward each other in shock. Phones quietly appeared beneath tables. People searching my name in real time. Watching the invisible daughter suddenly become visible. Laurent reached into his leather portfolio and removed a massive black catalog with gold embossed lettering. Then he held it up for the entire room to see. Me photograph covered the front page. Me sitting at my workbench beneath warm light with tiny gears spread across velvet cloth. Underneath the image were the words, "The Master of the Century." A strange feeling moved through my chest seeing it there in front of my family. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just clarity. Like finally looking into a mirror after years of distorted reflections. My mother stared at the cover like she physically could not process what she was seeing. "No," she whispered softly. "That can't be." Laurent turned toward her politely. "Madam," he said calmly, "your daughter restored one of the greatest horological masterpieces in private collection history." The room erupted into louder whispers. Someone near the front audibly said, "That's Ilara Vale?" Another voice answered immediately, "The Ilara Vale?" Suddenly people who hadn't acknowledged my existence all evening couldn't stop staring. Funny how quickly respect appears once status enters the room. Clara looked pale now. Truly pale. Not jealous exactly. More like shaken. Because for the first time in our lives she wasn't the center of attention anymore. Julien recovered first. Of course he did. People like him survive through performance. He stepped forward wearing a practiced smile. "Well," he laughed awkwardly, "looks like our sister's been hiding some success from us." Hiding. The word almost made me laugh. As if they had ever cared enough to ask. Laurent looked toward Julien with polite confusion. "Hiding," he repeated softly. "Mademoiselle Vale is internationally regarded as one of the greatest living restoration specialists." Living specialists. The sentence landed like thunder. Several guests literally stood from their seats now. I noticed one investor whispering frantically to another while staring at me in disbelief. Then Laurent delivered the final blow completely without realizing how devastating it would be. "I assumed her family knew," he said calmly. After all, she is trusted with royal collections that entire museums cannot access. My mother's face lost all color, because suddenly the entire illusion collapsed. Not just for her. For everyone. The successful family image she spent decades building had one massive crack in it. They never saw the most extraordinary person in the room. Not because I hid. Because they never looked. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Then unexpectedly, my mother rushed toward me. Tears suddenly filled her eyes. Not real tears. Panic tears. The kind people cry when control slips away publicly. She grabbed my arm tightly and forced a trembling smile toward the guests. "Oh, Alara," she laughed shakily. "Why didn't you tell everyone all this? We've always been so proud of her talent." That sentence finally broke something inside me. Not violently. Quietly. Like a thread snapping after years under pressure. I looked at her hand gripping my arm, then slowly looked into her eyes. And for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't afraid of disappointing her anymore. "You weren't proud of me, Mom," I said softly. The ballroom became completely still again. "You were proud of reflections, of titles, of people who made you look important." Her smile collapsed instantly. I continued before fear could stop me. "You never asked what I repaired. You never cared where I worked. You never wanted to know me." Every word felt strangely calm leaving my mouth. Not angry. Just true. "And the saddest part is," I whispered, "I spent most of my life believing maybe I deserved that." My mother's eyes filled with shock. Because people like her never expect the quiet child to finally speak. Across the room, I saw my father crying silently at the head table. Not dramatic tears. Just decades of regret finally reaching the surface. I walked toward him slowly through the silent ballroom. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. 500 people watching a family unravel in real time. When I reached my father, I gently placed the silver watch back into his hand. His fingers closed around it instantly. "I kept every article," he whispered shakily. "Every catalog. Every interview. I kept them hidden in my office." I looked at him carefully. "Why hidden?" His face crumpled in a way I'd never seen before. "Because I was weak," he admitted. That answer hurt more than lies ever could. But at least it was honest. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "But I always knew who you were." And somehow, that was enough. Not enough to erase the past. Not enough to repair everything. But enough to let a wound finally breathe. Behind us, guests continued whispering while my mother stood frozen beneath the chandeliers she worked so hard to impress people under. And suddenly I realized something important. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate requires emotional attachment. What I felt instead was freedom. The freedom of no longer needing approval from people incapable of giving it. I leaned down and kissed my father's forehead gently. Then I picked up my coat and walked toward the ballroom exit. Nobody stopped me. Not Clara. Not Julian. Not even my mother. Because for the first time in my life I wasn't background noise anymore. I was the silence after truth. Outside, cold night air wrapped around me as the ballroom doors closed behind my back. The city lights shimmered across the wet streets while distant music still echoed faintly from inside the Gala. I stood there breathing deeply for a long moment. And then something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not because I won. Not because they lost. But because I finally understood something my grandfather tried teaching me all those years ago in that dusty basement workshop. Broken things are not worthless. Sometimes they become masterpieces after surviving what should have destroyed them. A few months later, I expanded my studio internationally. Collectors continued arriving from all over the world. Museums requested collaborations. Apprentices applied hoping to study restoration under me. But the greatest change wasn't professional. It was personal. For the first time in my life, I stopped shrinking myself so others could feel taller. My father visits the studio now sometimes. We drink coffee quietly while tiny gears tick softly around us. There are still regrets between us, still sadness, but there's honesty too. And honesty is where healing begins. As for my mother, last I heard, she still tells people about her successful children at parties. Only now when she says my name, people listen differently, because the world finally saw me, not as the shadow, not as the background noise, but as the woman who mastered lost time. And maybe if you've ever felt invisible too, maybe your story isn't over yet either. Maybe the people overlooking you are simply too distracted by appearances to recognize your value. But one day the right door will open, the right person will see you, and when that moment comes, you won't need revenge. Truth will speak loudly enough on its own. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? Because sometimes the quietest people carry the most extraordinary stories inside them.